Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. As you know that we've been going around Fiji having budget consultations in various parts of Fiji. Last year when the budget was announced, given the fact that we had COVID-19, there's obviously a number of factors that were completely out of our control, a lot of variables that we weren't aware of. And therefore we had said when delivering the budget that there's a possibility that we'll have actually a mini budget. In case, the variables change. So obviously it has changed. The borders have opened up. 1st of December, the borders opened up. There's a number of other issues that have come to play. For example, the global climate, post-COVID, things like freight, etc., have increased tremendously. And we, of course, now have a war in Ukraine. So there has a number of impact on a number of the products that we buy from overseas. Including it has an impact, of course, on things like revenue and government expenditure. So that's the background to the mini budget. The mini budget is going to be delivered on the 24th of March at 7:30 p.m. in Parliament. And then we have a debate the next day. God willing, the budget gets passed the next day because it's a mini budget. The debate is held the following day as we've done previously. So when we go around to different locations in Fiji, we seek members' input into the budget, what they would like to see. A lot of people, in fact, have been in a very severe way, been misinformed about a number of issues. What we want to do is, before we open up the floor, I would like to keep it as informal as possible. We would like to share with you some background regarding the economy itself, where we were before the budget, where we were during the budget, what are the factors that came into play, and indeed where we are going to post the COVID itself. So if we can go on to the, as I said, pre-COVID-19, Fijian economy during COVID, and of course post-COVID. So, as has been highlighted on a number of occasions, prior to COVID, the economy had been growing 9 years in a row straight. This has never happened in Fiji before. We've had, once there was a growth of about 6 years straight, 6 to 7 years straight, but we've never had that. It's generally been, you have a, 1 year of growth and a negative growth and 1 year of growth. So it's been very inconsistent. So this, from 2010 up to 2019, has been the most consistent periods in the Fijian economy ever. Now, as a result of that, this consistency in the growth rate, we saw a growth generally in the wealth of the country. We see a lot more cars out in the road. The living standards of people had improved. Of course, we had the civil service reforms where civil servants' pay went up. And generally, the GDP of the country grew significantly. Now, of course, employment also grew. That, of course, was affected by COVID-19. So this is what I was saying earlier on. The GDP in Fiji actually increased. You can see the GDP in Fiji at independence was only $1 billion, which is 100 million. In this period here, which is very significant, when we had 9 years of straight growth, a lot of people are making fun of the fact that we had growth, making fun of, Beni Marama boom, etc. But they don't, of course, understand that this is what a result of 9 years growth does to your GDP. It's doubled from 2010 to 2019, which is highly significant. Similarly, GDP per capita, of course, went up significantly also in that particular period of time. GDP per capita doubled from 7,100 to 13,000, when you divide it by the number of people. What are the areas of the economy that actually contribute to the economy? It's not just tourism, it's not just sugar, but there are other facets of the economy, for example, manufacturing, wholesale and retail, trade, etc. I mean, you can see it on the screen over there, the screen over here. Hopefully it's legible to you. One of the areas that we, of course, as a government, our strategy has been to diversify the economic base. We don't want to be just dependent, for example, on tourism or just sugar, but we want to have a number of sectors within the economy that will contribute to the growth of the economy. So one area that is growing, for example, is the BPO sector, business processing outsourcing. In the past 2 years during COVID, 3,000 jobs have been created in that period when jobs actually were being reduced. For example, in the tourism sector, over 100,000 people lost their jobs in the tourism sector and related areas, but the BPO sector grew. So that's one area, a potential area of growth for us, and of course a focus in the budget. You would have seen last year, we allocated $300,000 to the BPO Council to be able to market Fiji itself offshore. We have a number of opportunities. They've now launched the outsourced Fiji brand. We have companies like Telstra that are buying Digicel, and Telstra does a lot of outsourcing of work itself. So there's a lot of opportunities for us, and that's what some of the things that we are doing, talking behind the scenes. The telecommunications sector in Fiji has matured in a very short period of time quite significantly. The broadband and the bandwidth, I should say, and the speed of internet in Fiji is very, very good, even in the same levels as Australia and New Zealand. It's relatively affordable in terms of the cost. So those things are, of course, attractive for us, and these are the areas, of course, we're trying to diversify the economy. Now, what has led to the 9 years of growth? Of course, you have the overall legal framework, which is the Constitution. A lot of smart and innovative economic and social policies were put in place, providing equal opportunities. So, education, for example, free education. Today, we have more girls in school than boys, more girls in university than males. A lot of females before did not get educated because parents could not afford to send them to high school or even primary school, depending on the size of the family. A lot of them did not go to universities. A lot of people who had very good marks could not go to university because their parents actually could not afford it. So we have toppers, we have TELs, we have free education. Of course, as I said, investment in telecommunications. There has been economic and political stability. We have a very competitive tax rate. I remember in 2007, if you earn more than $8,400 a year, you paid personal income tax. Then you shifted slightly to $8,600. Then a couple of years later, the income tax threshold became $16,000. If you earn less than $16,000, you did not pay any income tax. Now it's $30,000. So anybody that earns less than $30,000 a year does not pay any tax whatsoever. Obviously, it meant people had more money going in their pockets directly. So those are the kind of measures that did take place. There's also consumer-driven expansion. The retail sector grew. And we've, of course, invested quite significantly in infrastructure. If you look at the kilometers of electrical cables and water pipes that have been laid in Fiji in such a short period of time, it is actually unprecedented. Never before have we had that rate of infrastructure development in Fiji. So far more people are now connected to water, connected to electricity. Of course, there's still areas that we need to connect them to, or that need to be connected. But it meant that the productive capacity of the country improved significantly. So the person who used to sell the fish, catch the fish, sell the fish by the roadside, he in fact knew that because he didn't have electricity, he could not store the fish. You started selling the fish at $30 a bundle. By the afternoon, if you could not sell it, it went down to $10. You come along and negotiate really hard and get it for $5. The moment you connect that person to electricity, he has a cooler or a freezer. If he's not able to sell the fish, he stores it in the cooler, puts it out again the next day. You drive along next day, he throws water on it and says, fresh fish for sale, $30. That's meaning, you improving not just the quality of people's lives, but also in terms of giving them more income capacity. And as I said, of course, there's a lot of investment in technology, etc. So that was the economy and the socio-economic structure, the socio-economic condition of Fiji. What happened when COVID came along? Now, when COVID came into the world, nobody knew what would happen. In fact, not just in Fiji, of course, the entire world did not know what was going to happen. When the borders were locked down, nobody knew how deadly the disease would be. Nobody knew whether it will die like flies in 6 months' time, or it will last for 6 years, or 3 years, or 3 months, or 5 years. Nobody knew that. So obviously, as a government, we had to put in place contingency plans. A lot of that does not necessarily get announced, but we need to ensure that there's confidence maintained within the system. You can't be advertising everything. And as soon as the word vaccine came about, when we heard the word vaccine, we wanted to make sure that we had access to vaccine. The reality is that when you have a global pandemic and there's a vaccine that's going to be developed, all the rich boys and girls, meaning the rich countries, will get access to that first. We knew that would happen. That's why the Prime Minister was talking through Foreign Affairs, talking to all the diplomatic partners we have on a bilateral basis. We start talking to the World Bank, IMF, and various other agencies saying, look, we need to go to the front of the line. Because we knew that the rich countries will actually have the money, and they can afford to buy it, and they'll go to the front of the line. So through those efforts, Fiji was able to very quickly get access to vaccines. All of you, I'm sure, over here are vaccinated. Not one of you have paid a single cent for the vaccine. Nobody's paid for the vaccines anyone's received. Nor have you paid for the boosters. Initially, we got about 4,000 shots from COVAX. Then the Indians gave us about 100,000 doses. Then the Australians gave us doses. The Kiwis gave us doses. And the Americans are now giving us doses. So all those efforts actually helped us to be able to be one of the most vaccinated developing countries in the world, and very much ahead of most of the other developing countries in the world. As a result of that, we were able to open the borders. So that effort was critically important. We need to understand that you needed that consistency in policies and a long, decisive vision in respect of where we would end up. So what happened? Borders closed down, really affected our economy. Largest contraction in the economy ever, 15.2%. For a country that's highly dependent on tourism, obviously you'd expect that kind of impact. But 40% of our GDP depends on the tourism sector. So it's not only about the tourists not coming and therefore the hotel workers not having work. It was all the other people that live off the hotel industry. So for example, if you go to Nandi Airport, before you enter Nandi Airport near the bus stand or the bus shelter there's a lot of trees, you'll find that before COVID-19, ladies were there going there and selling, lovo packs, roti parcel, boiled evi, mithai. Now if AFL, the airport, is closed down, those people don't also have a living. They don't have a job. They did the same outside Fiji Airways. The guy was selling boo to the tourists, he doesn't have an income anymore. So it had a multiplier effect. It also affected people who were in the informal sector. As I mentioned, tourism, of course, contributes about 40% to the economy and brings about $2 billion in foreign reserves. So it would have an impact on our foreign reserves. Everything that we have in Fiji, everything everybody here is wearing is imported. You may have sewn the shirt in Fiji, but the fabric is imported. The glasses, the shoes you're wearing, this mic that I'm holding, the food we eat. At the moment, everyone wants to talk about flour. Flour is made out of wheat. Wheat is not grown in Fiji, it comes from Australia. If the price of wheat goes up tomorrow in Australia, the price of flour will go up in Fiji, even though we price control flour when it lands into Fiji. Over 100,000 Fijians lost their jobs, completely unemployed at release hours. Government collection halved by 50% on average. And of course, government had to increase its borrowings, because one of the decisions made by the government through the Prime Minister was that we needed to maintain a particular lifestyle at the fundamental level, which meant we should continue with free education. We did not compromise on that. Which meant that we should also have social welfare payments continue. We did not reduce that. Rural pregnant women still getting food vouchers, disability allowances, abandoned children, people living in poverty, all those continued. We of course added a few more to that. As we speak today, all market vendors in Fiji don't pay any fees. We're paying the fees for the 1 year. We can't just say to the municipal council, don't collect fees. The municipal council actually have to have fees. Otherwise, how will they provide services to the municipality? So we pay the fees on their behalf. So those are a lot of the measures that we put in place, and I'll go into the details later on. So in order to cater for that, you still want your potholes to be fixed. You still want water to be running in your taps. Water Authority of Fiji does not make profit in providing water to you. It's very cheap water. So government has allocated $200 million in the budget to Water Authority of Fiji. FRA gets a budget. Ministry of Health obviously has a budget. There's a decision made that government made a decision that any Fijian that's coming back to Fiji, in particular during that high, infectious time, coming back from overseas, we paid for their quarantine. Literally millions of dollars we actually forked out to hotels so people can stay in quarantine. We had Fijians who went to, for example, places like India for medical procedures. They had to come back home. Other countries, of course, did not allow their citizens to come back unless they paid for their own accommodation. We didn't. So you can see here what happened. The economy was growing for 9 years, and then because of COVID, 15.2% contraction, then 4.1%. The projections are that we will grow by 11.3% this year. 11.3, why? Because we're obviously starting off from a lower base. And I'll show you the figures later on, how the numbers in tourism actually dropped. Visitor arrivals, you can see, in 2010, we had 632,000 visitors that came to Fiji, tourists. 2019, 894,000. And then, of course, you can look at the drop. Declined by 83.6%, 147,000. And last year, only 32,000 people came to Fiji. They're not necessarily tourists in the traditional word. They may just come. Could have been some people coming in and out for work or business, etc., or working for multilateral agencies. We expect to go up to 447,000 this year. That's the projected numbers. Now, if you look at 447, it's even less than 2010. But we expect a 13.1% growth because the base we're starting off from is very low. So let's compare ourselves to other tourism-based countries. Because Fiji is obviously not alone in this. Maldives, which is in the Indian Ocean, they get a lot of tourists from France and China. Aruba, St. Lucia, Barbados, these are all in the Caribbean, Panama, etc. A lot of Americans go there. Suriname is on the north of South America. Again, a lot of tourists go there. Fiji's 15.2%, a contraction of the economy in these countries. Mauritius, they get a lot of French and Europeans. Bahamas, again, Americans. St. Kitts, Nevis, Grenada. All these are tourism-based countries. Vanuatu, of course, is a bit of a wild horse, a wild card, I should say. We just put Vanuatu there to compare it to other Pacific Island countries. But this is the level of contraction in tourism-dependent countries in 2020. Let's look at other countries. How did they do? So we put in some of the other countries as to how much the economy shrunk by. You've already been through this. But even countries like India, Singapore, Germany, Japan, USA, Australia, New Zealand, they contracted. New Zealand economy contracted by 2.1%, Australia 2.4%. But it'll be interesting when I show you the figures on debt. By the way, these figures are not put up by us. You can go to the World Bank, IMF sites, you'll get it. Don't go to One Mind, One Goal. They have a different set of figures. They're not the correct figures. So, we assisted Fijians with $500 million. Anybody that was in the formal sector, in other words, they could access their general account. If the monies ran out in the general account, government then forked out $225 a fortnight. That came from the budget. Then of course we had the $50 payout, the $90 payout, and the famous $360, which people applied for, and I'll show you how the figures are broken up. Today, for example, you can go to a GP, a private doctor. If you normally used to go to a health center or a nursing station or go to a hospital, you could not afford to go to a private doctor. You can now go to them and we pay the fees for you. We had called for advertisements. A number of doctors applied. We saw the ones that actually gave us good pricing, and they're on the list. There's about 15 doctors. Last Saturday, you would have seen we have advertised again because some more can join up too. So if they give you good pricing, you can go and visit them. And that list is actually published on the Fijian government Facebook page. So this is how we paid the unemployment benefits. So $205 million for the $225 a fortnight we paid for those who were in the formal sector. Then of course we had the $90. We said $90 per household. But then we found, a lot of people tend to chorro from the system. So they say, okay, one household, 3-4 people, they all applied for it too. So in order to mitigate against that risk, the next round we said $50 per person. We did 2 rounds of $50. So $205 million paid there through FMPF, 10.6, first round of 90, first round of 50, 11.2, second round of 50 is 10.2 million, and then of course the 360. First round of $106 million and $87 million. Now, that 106 we could have paid in one day, but we didn't. Because we knew everybody would rush off to Vodafone and Digicel and queue up and try and get their money out. And so we paid it a few days. What they did though, is that it kept the economy moving. Because you can imagine if the economy shrunk, no tourists are coming, a lot of people live off the tourism sector too. There are people who supply goods and services. The lady who makes the handicraft at the hotel, she's got no customers now, so she's got no job. So by pumping in money through that system, so she would have applied for the 360. You're giving people a source of income. So some would have bought shoes, clothes, food, paid their rent, paid certain bills. Some of course went and drank beer. But that's okay, because majority of the people did not abuse it. But if somebody got 360 and used $300 out of 360 or 320 for food and paying rent and buying shoes or clothes for the children, and they paid used $40 for beer, that's okay. Ultimately, that's the choice, but most people put it to good use. And whenever we roll out such initiatives, we look at about 10-15% what we call a risk factor. All governments in the world run our deficit. No government makes a profit. Businesses make a profit. Governments can't make a profit. You go to Valelevu Health Center, the cost of your medical fees, if you charge you the full rate, you'd be paying about $50. But nobody pays $50. You go to the police officer, he does not charge you a fee, right? You actually have to. The services they provide, you don't charge a fee for that. When FRA goes and does somebody's street, you don't pay FRA for that. That has to come from government budget. Today, Kayasi, for example, has a hospital. They do surgeries. They've got X-ray machines. They've got electricity. The people in Kayasi could not afford that hospital. We're not saying to them, because it costs us so much money to bring the hospital here, it costs us $1 million to bring electricity, etc. You have to pay for it. Before they had to pay, 10% contribution. Now nobody pays for it. So governments obviously have to pay for certain things. We make also revenue. The way we collect money is through taxes. When you pay your VAT, when you pay your company tax, when you pay your personal tax, when you pay ECAL. That's how government collect revenues. Or people pay fines. You do speeding, government collects some money from there. But overall, you'll always have this deficit, this red bar here. The trick, of course, is to make sure that the red bar does not get too long. So this is your expenditure and this is your revenue. Out of this year, the blue line, the $3.19 billion of expenditure we have, 1.1 billion of that is just paying the wages of civil servants. That's the salary cost. Civil servants, RFMF, correction services, and the police. So 1/3 approximately of our expenditure, operating expenditure, is salaries for civil servants. We of course are the largest employer in Fiji. So over here you can see, because of COVID, our deficit grew significantly, of course, compared to these years here. Public debt, you can see our debt to GDP ratio was fairly flat. In fact, we were going down. We had Winston, $500 million to rebuild after Winston. Winston wiped off 1/3 of the value of our GDP in 36 hours. Please don't underestimate cyclones. That's why we don't like cyclones. Costs a lot of money. If you go now, travel between Singatoka and Nandi, there's 3 spots in the highway that's been washed away. One completely is gone. You have to dig all the way down. And that's not even from a cyclone. That's just heavy rainfall. Because it rained continuously 4 or 5 days. That's climate change. That's why we talk a lot about climate change. There's a huge impact on the economy, on development capacity. This is why we've been going out to the international fora. The Prime Minister talks about climate change. We go to the World Bank and ADB and say, you must give us concessional financing because we did not cause the climate crisis. We did not put the carbon dioxide in the air. It's the industrialized countries that did it, but we are the ones at the cold face of climate change. Some of you are old enough to know that Fiji before, we would get one cyclone maybe every 5 years or even 10 years. Now if you don't get 3 cyclones in one season, people get worried. You get 3 cyclones, heavy rainfall. So this is why, people have said we're going with a begging bowl. It's not a begging bowl, it's a reality of it. So that's why I said if we have to rebuild, we need to get concessional financing because we did not actually cause the problem. But over here you can see that our debt as a percent of GDP has increased. And of course our debt levels have increased. But when you borrow money, you must consider 2 things. A lot of people talk about dinau and debt and karza and all of that without actually understanding it. Why are you borrowing the money? If you're borrowing money to just waste it, if you're not building infrastructure, then obviously borrowing for the wrong reasons. If you're borrowing money during COVID to make sure people's livelihoods are maintained, that is borrowing for a good reason. And then the other thing is, what is the cost of the debt? How much is it costing you? What's the interest rate? That's what you also have to think about. In the same way, a lot of people change banks. They say, I'll go to BSP because they're giving me 5%. But if tomorrow Bread Bank is going to give 2%, you'll go to Bread Bank. You're paying less for the debt. So this slide here just essentially shows you our debt to GDP ratio. As you know, is 56.2%, went down significantly. Then of course here, you had Winston's slight jump, and then it went up significantly from 48.4, 61.8, 79, and now 88.1. That's where it's sitting at. But now with the economy rebounding, we expect that to come down quite significantly because the GDP will grow. It shrunk, and of course, we'll be able to better handle the financial situation. So look at the tourism-dependent countries. What's their debt to GDP ratio? Suriname, debt to GDP ratio, 140.6. Maldives, 137.2. Bahamas, Mauritius, St. Vincent, etc. We sit over here at 80%. So all of these countries actually have been affected also. They're tourism-dependent countries. Then we looked at other countries. You know how I mentioned to you earlier on, the New Zealand economy contracted by 2%, 2.2% actually. But look at their debt levels. 28% of debt to GDP ratio, now it's 52, almost doubled, even for a country like New Zealand. Look at Australia, 42 to 62%. Malaysia, 56 to 71. Fiji, of course, went from 46 to 80. These countries are in a different league altogether. Mauritius went from 66 to 101. St. Lucia, 60 to 96. Significant hikes. Of course, USA and Maldives and Singapore are in a completely different league altogether. That's how much the debt to GDP ratio. So the orange line is before COVID, the blue line is after COVID. So what are the facts about debt? As I mentioned to you earlier on, one of the issues about debt is that you have to see how much it's going to cost. Today, we have a significant number of debt that's what we call concessional debt. I'll show you the figures too. So just to recapture what I said, the debt to GDP ratio is reduced from 56.2 down to 43.5 pre-Winston. And of course, if we did not borrow in this period, it would have meant the economy would have shrunk even further. The economy shrunk further, our dollar would have had to be devalued. You can imagine what would happen. For a country that imports nearly everything, apart from dalo, cassava, bele, bhaji, bhindi, bora and all of that, everything else is imported. If the dollar even was devalued even more, the cost of those things would have gone up even more. Instead of paying, say, $2 to buy an American good that's worth $1, you would have had to pay $3. Huge impact on people, would have caused a lot of socioeconomic problems. So, World Bank, through the IDA funds, is lending to us 40-year term, 10-year grace period, zero interest rate, 0.75% service charge. With loan at that rate, by the time you end up paying, you're getting a grant of 57%. You see, the amount of money you borrow today, if you pay the same money over a period of time, you're paying less money. At an interest rate of 0%, the Japanese, JICA, 40-year term, 10-year grace period at 0.01%. And that's like a 60% grant element over that period. So, say for example, a $40 million loan, in other words, 60% of that is really a grant. It may look on the books as a loan, but it's actually 60% of it is a grant, because by the time you end up paying, you're paying far less. Now, as I was mentioning, everything we have really is important. So Nicole here is holding this pen, she's holding a phone, she's wearing these earrings, she's wearing these clothes, everything is important. The shoes are important. The food she's going to eat is important, except those things that I mentioned. The cars all are here, bought from Japan. This laptop here is all from overseas. When you buy these things, you need to have enough foreign currency to be able to buy it. They're not going to buy it in Fijian dollars. All the fuel in Fiji, bought by the 3 fuel companies, come from Singapore. The oil refinery is there. They pay in US dollars. You need to have that amount of foreign currency. Under international standards, if a country should have at least 3 months worth of foreign reserves to pay for, 3 months worth of imports. That's a benchmark. Over here you can see that we had $1.5 billion in 2011. 2018, we had about $2 billion, 4.5 months worth of imports. Today we have $3.1 billion and 8.7 months worth of imports. So in a very good space. We can pay for things that come from overseas. Colloquially speaking, sometimes when people say, that country is bankrupt because they can't pay for their goods when they buy from overseas. Some countries actually have that problem. Because we borrowed more from overseas in the COVID period, there's a lot of money in the banking system. If you go and try and do a term deposit in the bank, you get very low interest rate, because there's lots of money in the banking system, because foreign money has come in because of the borrowing from offshore. So we're in a good space, therefore interest rates will be fairly stable. You won't get very high interest rates. Oh, sorry, this will change this one. Okay. So again, this is just highlighting, this is a major issue for us globally, inflation. The price of things are going up. There are 2 factors at the moment, before Ukraine, 2 factors. The cost of freight is increased significantly. Containers are in shortage. I was just talking to somebody 3 days ago, a businessman who imports a lot of food. He said he used to pay $5,000 for a container. He now pays $15,000 for the same container. That's how much it has increased. Now, this gentleman here is importing fish, say from Indonesia, and he's paying $5,000 for the container, and he's selling the fish ultimately to you for $3 a can. If tomorrow he has to pay $15,000 for the container, he's not going to sell the fish to you at $3. You don't expect him to sell the tin of fish to you at $3. He's going to make a loss. He'd rather not be in business. He has to increase the price. Same way with before Winston, Yangona cost $85 a kilo. After Winston, $185 a kilo. Why? There's a shortage. Yangona plants got damaged, short supply, everybody still drinks it at the same rate. High demand, low supply. So the price will go up. The other thing that's also happening is the supply chains have also been affected. So for example, a lot of like this gentleman's got his phone here. The phone has got a chip in it. All phones have a chip. The mineral or the metal that's used to make these chips is in short supply. Borders have been shut down. Today I just sent an article saying that Russia and Ukraine have the bulk of the nickel in the world. Mineral nickel comes from those countries. So things that are made from nickel now will be in short supply, or the price will go up. You've seen the price of fuel has just gone up in the past few days. $140 a barrel. It was only about $37 earlier last year or so. The price has gone up. That part of where the war is taking place, they supply a lot of fuel, they supply a lot of gas. Cooking gas will get affected. There'll be short supply. Qatar, of course, has a lot of gas. But now there's less supply, that means high demand, price will go up. That's something beyond our control. But what we can do is that when it lands in Fiji, do we price control it? How do we deal with it when it lands in Fiji? But of course, if the input cost is higher, the price will go up. So inflation, you can see inflation going up. And I'll show you over here what I was mentioning earlier on. You see this yellow line here is what we call the domestic inflation, price of things domestically. You can see it's been below 0%. In other words, it has not been increasing. But the other line, which is the green line, is the imported inflation. You see the yellow line here, it went up over 0, then came back down. It's at 0.6%. Import inflation, 12.2. Fuel, flour, everybody's talking about flour now. Flour is actually a price control item. But, as I mentioned, did I mention before about wheat? So, if the price of wheat goes up, then obviously the price of flour will go up. FCCC and Punja and Sons, there are only two companies that make flour in Fiji. Punja and Sons and FMF. They buy their wheat from Australia. When it comes to Fiji, they pay, say if they're buying at $300 a ton, that's the freight cost, the labor cost, electricity cost, they put a few things in it, they grind it, they get flour. But before they don't sell it to you directly to you, they sell it to the supermarket. Before they sell it to the supermarket, they go to FCCC, they say, this is our cost, they say, okay, you cannot make only this much margin. Then when they sell it to the supermarket again will say, this is my cost, rent cost, electricity, labor cost. Then FCCC say you can make only this much margin. That's what you call price control. But if tomorrow Australia, which they have done, puts up the price of wheat, then of course the base at which you start from will be higher. Most foods in Fiji now we don't charge duty at all, or have 0 or 5%. So road to recovery. So we are projected to grow, as we said earlier on, by 11.3% in 2022, 8.5 in 2023, 7.7 in 2024. This was put together before Ukraine blew up. So before Ukraine blew up, we said it will take about 3 years for us to return to pre-pandemic levels. And of course, you know, vaccine rollout is happening, the boosters are there. We'll provide $500 million to those who have been assisted. A lot of people are going to jobs. Yesterday I was at the Sheraton with all the hotel workers. Sheraton was closed down because they were renovating. Literally a few hundred people are now going back to work from next week, Wednesday. They're all very excited. But what did we do in order to ensure that we create an enabling environment? So we said ECAL, you know, Environment Climate Adaptation Levy was reduced from 10% to 5%. Departure tax was reduced from $200 to $100 to make it cheaper attractive for people to come to Fiji. No more stamp duties, no more service turnover tax. We reduced tariff across the board. No more requirement of business license, unless of course you're going to sell food or something. You need the health inspectors to come along, but normal business, you don't need a business license anymore. A lot of tax relief, deferment of tax payments. We reduced F&PF payments so people had more money in their pocket. We announced in the budget in July last year the $200 million package. So if you get that loan, we pay on your behalf the interest rate for the first 2 years. Over $100 million has already been disbursed. You get the loan, first 2 years we pay your interest rate. And anybody bank participating in that space, they don't require you to do the principal payment. So first 2 years, no repayment. You just focus on your business. Whether it's micro business, small business, medium business, large business. And then you start doing your repayments in the third year. So we are now in a recovery mode, notwithstanding what's happening in Ukraine. Like we said, we've have not had a devaluation. We've got a strong foreign currency position. We've got fiscal stability. None of the banks have closed down. In fact, some of the banks combined may have done what they call a provisioning for $100 million. In other words, they don't expect to collect those loans anymore. You know, hotel worker may have had a $2,000 personal loan. They lost a job for 2 years, the bank's not going to go after them. They have to write it off. Despite all of that, the banks are still in a secure position because of the macroeconomic stability that we've provided. And of course, we continue to focus on diversification, like I mentioned, the BPO, the call centers, etc. Digicel is being bought by Telstra, which is an Australian company. And they, of course, will be coming to Fiji. We're looking at them going to the BPO sector also. Fisheries and forest. And of course, you know, we are constantly looking at new ideas in terms of entrepreneurship. So ladies and gentlemen, before we open up the floor, some of you, we find that sometimes people don't want to make comments here. They want to make their contribution after the session is finished. You can email it to us, budgetconsultation@economy.gov.fj by, you know, next week or so, or you can drop it off, but most people email now, or you can send it by post. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the presentation. And I'd like to open up the floor for any questions or comments you may have, any contributions you'd like to make. Please don't hesitate to ask any question, and if you want to make any contributions. Thank you. Mike over here, please.
Good evening, sir. Okay, first of all, I'd like to qualify myself. I'm a person with disability, and can we have such environment in Nasinu that a financial institution is able to operate from here, just like it's easier for us to make bank deposits and payments to the bank? And I mean, just want to make a contribution to budget. And secondly, as a person with disability, I was able to secure employment in government. And before I started, I've got a contract, employment contract signed. And before I took up the position, the PS terminated my contract. And for a month or so, they were keeping my contract without telling me what was wrong. And after, when I wrote to the PS, why was my contract taken back? And then they didn't even respond to it. Then I filed a matter with the court. And then I filed a matter in the court at 8 a.m. And at midday, the PS terminated my contract. I mean, under 2013 Constitution, Bill of Rights, my right to employment was breached, and Section 150 of the Constitution, right to information, freedom of information, was breached without informing me why was my contract taken back. So at the moment, I can't say much because the matter is in employment tribunal, and that's what I understand. As a minister, it might not have reached you. And for your information, IG's office is defending the case, and I'm the plaintiff in the matter. And as a person with disability, Section 77 of the Employment Act, an employer cannot terminate my contract, and the Disability Act, the termination can only come if the position has been redundant. But in this case, the position has been not redundant. So in other words, they have discriminated me.
Look, I'm sorry what you've gone through, but as you correctly pointed, I mean, I don't know about this matter, but as you correctly pointed, we can't really discuss this publicly because before the courts. Okay. But let's go through the process. But if you want, you can give us you can send an email, or if you have any representations you do want to make, or just say that this is the matter before the courts, we can obviously accept that from you. Okay?
Okay. And one more request. If since 2019, since my contract was terminated, I have not been in employment, and I have been on disability pension scheme and receiving $19 at the moment and supporting a family for 1 month period. It's quite hard, and if the allowance can be increased. And one more request, if I can be allocated a piece of land so that I can do some source of income for myself. This is a request from my side.
Okay. Okay. So those are personal matters. So, there's something that you can write to us. We've got staff over here. Anybody else who's got any personal matters, we've got a staff, they'll be sitting in the back over there. You can take, they'll go over there now, and they can take your individual complaints. Okay? We've done that in all I should have said that in the beginning, we've done that in all the other budget consultations. A lot of people do come with issues, whether it's something like yours or land matter or personal matters. We get them to lodge their complaints with our staff. They take your number, your phone number, and we can then get back to you later on. Okay. Regarding the first issue that you raised about banks, whether bank branches can be here, we can't force banks to go to a particular area. So, it's really up to the banks whether they want to provide service in that particular area or not. A lot of people now do, of course, the banking on the phone, the internet banking. A lot of people do use M-Pesa also. That 360 that we gave, everybody, the applications were made on the phone, as you would know. It took 3 minutes and we paid everything on the phone. So, but government does not have the legal right to go and force a private bank to open a branch somewhere.
I understand that, sir, but we can, what I'm asking is to create an environment so that banks can, consider it will be wise to operate a branch from here, just to create an environment.
The environment is there. They pay very little tax now compared to what they used to. But look, we're putting up a bus terminal here in Valelevu, as you know. What we call a suburban bus terminal. So with that actually happening, we may find that a lot of businesses and banks may actually come here too. Okay. Thank you. But if you want to go, there's staff over there at the back. Yeah, those 3, 4 people that are putting their hands up. Please.
Sir, here as a representative of Vivia High School. So during the study of Vivia High School, we undertook a solar project supervised by the Ministry of Energy, where there was a grant, there was a program in the Ministry of Energy where we were assisted by World Bank, but actually the school paid everything. So the school paid 67,000 for that project, but that project was a failure, supervised by the Ministry of Energy. I hope Ministry of Energy can answer that to you. And while we want to revamp the solar system, we paid $7,000 to Ministry of Energy, but as program of the government, that it will be fully funded by government, that $7,000 was refunded, but we did not receive anything for the project. In the 2019-2020 budget, if you remember, 120,000 was allocated to the VI school for the solar project. However, after 1 month, we came to the Ministry of Energy. There was nothing for us. I want to raise this that the high school at the moment is in the dark. We want solar energy. We have hope for that 120,000 to light up the high school. We have made our mark in education. And I think government needs to see us. We have developed our school. For your information, there are 9 teachers' quarters in the school. Only 1 was donated by the government. Everything was done by the school. So I have a paper here for what we need urgently. But I hope that government will see us. And also, I went to the Ministry of Education, to the AMU, because at the moment, our school needs repair. And they have asked me that we can be entitled to the 50,000, but we have to provide everything. Actually, by next week, Monday, we will provide everything, photographs and so on, to try and revamp and rebuild to have a face uplift of the school. Thank you, sir.
Look, thank you for that. I'll take the papers off you. You can give it to us too, please. And I hope you've got your phone contact details there and your name. Okay, great, thanks. I'm sorry about what we went through Department of Energy, but we'll certainly follow up through that, through the Ministry of Economy. Okay, no, I'll take it off. Thanks. Anybody else?
I'm Humphrey Chang, Fiji Chamber of SME. I'm not sure that I've heard properly the 2 previous speakers. What I want to raise is the issue about the recovery mode. The recovery mode, as I understood it, was a 200 million which was offered, which is not exhausted at the moment. It's about 40% utilized, and there's still a big chunk of money left with the banks. I went to the bank and asked if we could apply for further loan. They say, yes, you can apply, but there's no more 2-year grace period. The grace period is taken away. But, you know, if this was the same phase, same component as the 200 million one, because it's not exhausted, I think it should remain. The 2%, the 2-year interest-free should remain. I wonder if you'd like to take that up, sir.
Which bank?
FDB.
Okay. So the 2-year grace period has not ended. Over $100 million has already been disbursed. So over 50%. But I can tell you that FDB has taken the lion's share of it. Most of the other banks have not taken the lion's share of it. FDB has been the one that's really been the one bank that's been giving out the loans. So maybe they're being a bit cautious, because otherwise they'll be the only ones lending under this scheme. But it has not ended. You can go to the other banks also and they can give you the 2-year grace period. Okay? Yeah. I know BSP is doing it, Bread Bank is doing it, HFC is doing it. I understand that Westpac and ANZ may have also done so too. You can try with them too. Just so you know, under this scheme, the RBF lends to the banks at 0.25%, and then they on-lend to you at no more than 3.99%. Okay, any other questions, comments, submissions? Are we here? Whatever. And you can talk in any language you like. We can get people to translate for you. No problem.
Bula Minister, my only issue is this disability grant people, you should put it on. Last year we applied in August. Till there we haven't had anything, no feedback.
Were you getting it before?
No,
Or is it you're a new applicant?
new applicant.
Okay, you can give us the details, we'll follow up for you.
Okay.
Look, I mean, overall, of course, we want to be able to, some of these poverty alleviation schemes, we want to be able to increase the amounts. But of course, we can't just do it for one or two persons, we have to be able to do it across the board. As it is, we're paying about $110 million in, disability or poverty alleviation schemes. And, once the economy grows bigger, then of course we can have the capacity to even give more in that respect. Okay, can you get the mic off? Any contributions, comments? One over here, please.
Thank you, sir. Istanbul Binaka. Mr. Firozia. First of all, I would like to thank the government of the day for providing or not cutting the civil servants' salaries. And one of the, it's not a submission, it's a story that I'd like to share. My mom called me from Lekutumbua. I'm from Korokanti, Lekutu. And she said, your sisters was married in Suva. The husbands are no longer working due to COVID. None of them are working because they are working in the private sector in terms of contractors, laborers. And then she told me, could you buy the groceries for them every fortnight, $50 and pass it on to them. And I was touched by that, and I'm so thankful to the government who has not, I'm a teacher by profession, and I continue to request the government, if in the mini budget consultation that is going on right now, the civil servants pay is not cut. So I would like to thank the minister and the government, and you were able to really make my mom's dream come true by providing the food for my sisters, those who are in Suva. That is a contribution I would like to make, sir. Thank you very much.
That's a lot of pressure. As we said with the civil servants' pay, we pay $1.1 billion in salaries. Even if we cut 10% salaries of civil servants, we would have sucked out $110 million from the economy. The economy would have shrunk even further. But of course, during the COVID time, a lot of the civil servants with the cold face, the nurses, the doctors, etc. There's no way you could justify cutting their pay. The other people who are sort of leading the charge. I know some teachers did not teach for about 8 months, but they still got paid full pay. Well, that's the other side of things, that teachers don't tell that story. And hopefully they'll now, appreciate it even more, and then, work a lot harder. I just getting into social welfare. I told this story the other day. I was in Ba about 6 weeks ago, and there's an opening of a market extension. And after the ceremony, we stood there for about 3 or 4 hours. Eventually ended up sitting down. There was a long queue of people having their personal complaints. A lot of people came, land issues, home, etc., etc. So one gentleman came, very quietly spoken, and he said, my wife and I, both of us are getting allowance. We get $90 each. Is there any chance of increasing the amount? And I said, well, actually, no. At the moment we can't, but we will maintain it. So I said, why do you want it? She's wearing a hat. And he lifted up his head. His hat, there's a hole in his head, literally. And he said they took the flesh out of this part to cover the hole in the head. It was all pink. So I said, what happened? He said, I was in the car with my brother 2 years ago. My wife was in the car with me, and we had a car accident. And the car hit electricity poles. And so the car crashed. So he said my wife's leg was fractured. So I picked her up in my arms and I carried her out of the car. And as I was stepping out of the car and walking out away from the car, the live wire touched my head from the pole and electrocuted him. But he was grounded, his wife was not. So today his wife is full-time bedridden and she needs adult diapers. And he said that cost me $45 a week. And we get, $90 each a month. So, I mean, that's the extent of how some people, the stories they have. We would love to be able to increase the allowance we pay to people like that. So we need to have a system that takes care of, those kind of situations too. So we're trying to build those flexibilities. We, of course, we could not make an exception for him because if we do it for him, we have to do it for everybody else. Right? It has the overall impact on the budget. So we got in touch with a lot of people and now they've been given, like 1 year's supply of adult diapers, etc. But for us, constantly as a policy, government policy, we try and look at, when you set in place new parameters of assistance, sometimes people fall outside that framework. So you need to have a particular level of flexibility. There's no abuse of it, but also at the same time it goes to the right people. So those are the types of things we have to look at in the budget when we're formulating the budget. Any other questions, comments? You're the quietest lot we've had so far. Another teacher.
Thank you, sir. In fact, I'm here representing some of my friends, neighbors, the community that we live with, and they are the garment workers, daily laborers. The daytime today we had a discussion that today there is a budget consultation at Rishikul and we'll be part of that. And they came to me and said, please do pass this message to Honorable AG, the Economy Minister. This $50, $90, $360 that was given to these people during the pandemic at the toughest time of the era. Difficult time. Yet, government had a plan for $50, government had a plan for $90, and twice $360. And these of my friends, the government workers, these laborers, they were the benefits of it. And today they carry their depth and down in their heart. Probably they are not brave to stand in a crowd like this and talk, and that's why they were too shy. They've requested me to pass this message to the government. We're very thankful that it has come up. And this is what probably all those people who are out there have in their heart. And today, on behalf of those people, I'd like to voice it out and say thank you to the government for doing that. The foreign reserve still is strong. Pandemic came, the toughest time came and gone. But these foreign reserves are still strong. Who can do it? And how can do it? It's only this government that can do it. Not that I'm saying because I want to say, this is what people are feeling and they've requested me to say. So on behalf of those friends and colleagues and community, Honorable Economy Minister say thank you for the support and we look forward for the same support in the revised budget to come. Thank you, sir. Naka.
I hope there is not an indirect way of saying you want another round of 360. Okay, any other questions or comments? Please, over here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Bola Ndau. I'm a native of Nasinu. I went to this very school for 6 years, I think. Basically, I want to echo those sentiments by the gentleman that just spoke previously. And for me, what really stood out is the response, the health response to the crisis, basically, how swift it was, and also how measured it was in ensuring that they weren't in place for too long. March 2020, when we've had the first case in Fiji. We saw international border restrictions coming in very swiftly. We had Delta in April 21. We saw the internal border restrictions coming in. And how quickly, we turned things around once we understood how the disease works. So it speaks to, I guess, a clear-headedness that the previous gentleman spoke to, and the aggressive economic recovery agenda that followed that. In last year, with the $900 million concessional funding that we procured from our partners globally, to enable the government to be able to reach out with 400 or 500 million in support to keep the bottom falling out from underneath, the most vulnerable in our society. And to add to those sentiments, thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. There's a couple of places, some common questions that people have asked us. I think I've already mentioned about the price increase and things I've spoken about, for example, things like flour, etc. We expect the freight costs generally, overall cost of goods to continue to increase. We expect it for the next, 6 to 9 months it will do so. And of course, then it will plateau out after a period of time. As I mentioned also, the Ukraine war does present a lot of things. Ukraine apparently produces about 25% of the world's wheat. They also have, access to, I mentioned nickel, gas and oil in that part of the world will get affected. We don't know what kind of war will develop from it, whether it's going to become, more countries will get directly involved. We don't know about that. We are quite far away, but we can also feel the impacts of it too, in terms of particular pricing. The issue that was commonly raised with us about, minimum wages. As you know, there's been very much in the public eye at the moment. So just very quickly, if I can just address minimum wages. We never had what we call a national minimum wage in Fiji until the Bainimarama government introduced it. Other sectors had their minimum wage, so like electricians, plumbers, waiters, forklift drivers. We had what we call 10 wage sectors where they had their own minimum wage. There's never a minimum wage, a national minimum wage. A national minimum wage essentially means that nobody should get paid below that amount, no matter what work they do. So if somebody comes and works at your house and is cutting the grass, or if they are, for example, digging a hole because you need to put a pine post or whatever in it, you should pay them no less than, current rate is 268. That's what you should pay, no less than that. That's a national minimum wage. But everybody else has their own minimum wage. Like a minimum wage for waiter is $3.45 an hour at the moment. A forklift driver is much higher, electrician is a lot higher. So a national minimum wage, when it was introduced, we said we'll do reviews. The last time it was done, reviewed was in 2018. And we gave an undertaking that we'll review the national minimum wage every 2 years. The reason why we have a national minimum wage in the different wage sectors is because, under the previous systems you had what you call COLA, cost of living adjustment. That was a very, basic way of looking at wages. Because different sectors sometimes have different demands. There's a shortage of skill sets. So you would actually have to pay more. There's certain qualifications required for some areas. Some qualifications or some jobs are more high risk. So obviously they should be paid accordingly. COLA is an old-fashioned thing. I heard some politician mentioning that recently. So when we do the national minimum wage, we also look at the other wage sectors. How do we arrive at the national minimum wage? So we have independent persons that actually come and do the assessment. So there's a professor that comes out from Australia. Now he looks at what's currently prevailing, what's things like inflation, what are projected, economic outlook, what are the skill sets that's here, that's missing, etc. So then they, at the moment they're going around the countryside, you can go and make submissions, any of you are here, look at the Fijian government Facebook page. They have advertised where they'll be. You can go there and make your submissions. Anybody is allowed to make submissions. Anybody can make submissions. We know for a fact that a lot of the garment industry owners, they don't want minimum wage to go up too high. Because they say that if we have the minimum wage a lot higher, we may not get the orders because somebody may go to a country that may produce it at a much cheaper rate. Some people say it's okay, we can live with it. Some people say increase it but buy this much. So he basically goes around, collates all the information, does his own analysis, then of course makes a recommendation to government. So when the national minimum wage is increased, the other wage sectors also get affected too, depending on the shortage of skill sets, depending on the people in that particular area. So that's what national minimum wage is all about. And of course the reason why we did not do a review in 2020, it would be very silly to do a review of national minimum wage when you have 100,000 people unemployed during COVID. So now, of course, the borders have opened up. That's why the review is being carried out. The other issue that people have asked us commonly is what they say Bill 17, which is actually Act 22 of 21. There's no more Bill 17. A bill is a proposed law. It's something that's going to become a law. When it becomes a law, it's called an act. It's an act of parliament. So Act 22 of 21. So it goes to essentially, there's a lot of misinformation about it. So if you, for example, if this gentleman here represents a particular land-owning unit, and I want to go and lease land off them, say for agricultural purposes, before this law came into effect, there were 5 things the landowners have to do or agree to before I can get a proper lease. So I will say, look, I want to lease 10 acres of land for agriculture. The landowners, 60% of the landowning unit, whether it's a Toka Toka, Matangali, Yavusa, etc., depending on which part of Fiji you are, 60% of the members of the landowning unit have to agree to lease the land. At least 60%. They have to agree to lease the land. They have to agree that it will be leased for agricultural purposes. They also have to agree for how long the land will be leased for. 30 years, 50 years, 70 years, 99 years. They also then have to agree what will be the premium I will have to pay to the landowners through TLTB. TLTB will come and do a valuation. They said, okay, 99-year lease, the premium, or to buy the lease, not goodwill. Goodwill is illegal, but the premium, I have to pay $20,000. And then they also have to agree how much I'll pay on an annual basis the lease payments. Because you have to pay lease on an annual basis too. So if they say, okay, $2,000 a year. All those 5 things, landowners had to consent to before the law. All those 5 things are still there, even after the law. Nobody can lease Itoke land without those 5 things being agreed to by the landowners. That's still there. The only thing that's changed, assuming that I've got the lease now, they've all agreed, I've paid them the money, TLTB has issued me the lease, I've got a proper lease, and I want to start a goat farm. So after 1 year, I want to start my goat farm. Then I say, oh, hang on, there's no water. I can connect it to Water Authority Fiji. For me to be able to connect water to the land before the law, I had to go and get the consent of TLTB. If I want to connect it to electricity, I have to get the consent of TLTB. If I want to go and borrow money from a bank to put up my farmhouse or put up a goat shed, I have to get the approval of TLTB, not the landowner. Landowners always, they got the lease money, they're giving you the lease, they get the lease payment. They're not concerned about the administrative stuff. So this was an unnecessary burden that was on the lessees. And it made Itoke land a lot more unattractive. Similarly, we made a similar amendment to government land, state land. Before the law, if state land, for example, you leased it and you want to connect to water, electricity, get a mortgage, you have to go to the Director of Lands to get approval each time. That's also gone. So it's the administrative part of it. So that's the change. Nothing has affected the landowner's rights or the ability to gain consent. Yes, if I've got the lease and 5 years later, I want to convert the agricultural lease to tourism, I have to get the consent of the landowner. That's still there. If I want to sell the land, I have to get the consent of the landowner. That's still there. If I want to subdivide the land, I have to get the consent of the landowner. That's still there. If I want to put up a building and rent out the building, I have to get the consent of the landowner. That's still there. All those things, all those rights pertaining to the landowners have all been preserved. There's just a lot of misinformation, a lot of lies regarding, what people call Bill 17 is actually Act 22 of 21. You would have seen people like some landowners, Nayovo family came out in the Fiji Sun the other day on Monday. They said they've now understood that. So a lot more people are getting the understanding of it. Linked to that, of course, government has been investing in what we call Itauke land development, where we are actually allocating funding to help Itauke people subdivide their land. So if you are a Matangali, you formed your own company or a trust, or if you're an individual Itauke person, you've got a lease for a land, you want to subdivide the land, government does it for you. So you then reap the benefits of it. Because before, they did not have the funds to subdivide it. Somebody would come along and say, look, I'll lease 50 acres of land, I'll give you $200,000, and people are happy. Oh, it's bush, there's nothing there, you're getting $200,000. But he has the money to go and subdivide the land, and when he subdivides the land, he sells one lot for $200,000. So the whole idea of the Itauke land development was to engender or inform Itauke people, you can actually make money from your land. We'll subdivide the land for you. So you sell the lease, you get the benefit directly yourself, not some other developer. So we subdivide the land, we put road, water, electricity, the FEA transmission, underground electrical cables, all of that we do. And there's a lot of people actually who will, in the next few months when it's completed, will become millionaires overnight. One very smart lady, she went and leased the land from her own Matangali in the Western Division, and we've already done the subdivision. In fact, it's already completed, but because the design was an old design, the electrical cables were overhead. We've decided to put it underground. So when there's a cyclone, nothing gets blown down. There's about 33 lots, valued at about $100,000, $150,000. She'll sell that overnight. She's got $3 million in her bank account. So that's what we're doing with the Itauke land development. And also we make land available on long-term leases. It's a 99-year lease. This lady may come and buy the land. She can build a nice concrete home. When she builds something, it creates economic activity because somebody will come and dig the foundation, lay the stones, lay the brick, lay the steel, paint the house, do the plumbing, do the roof. It creates jobs. So those are some of the things that we are doing in respect of that. The last point I'd like to also make, which also a lot of people ask us questions on that, is the first home grant. We started the scheme a few years back, but last year we increased the grant sum. So if you are going to build your first home, you can get a grant of $30,000 from the government. The conditions are you must own the land or you must own the lease. It should be under your name. And you go to a bank, you say to the bank, I want to build a house and it's going to cost me $150,000. People, they look at your income levels, and you also tell them that I want to also apply for the government grant. If you earn less than $50,000 a year, the bank approves your loan, you get a grant of $30,000 from government. It's a grant, you don't pay us back. It helps you with your loan. You give straight out $30,000. If you're buying your first home, we give you $15,000. But if you earn more than $50,000, say if you're a couple, you may earn more than $50,000. If you earn more than $50,000 but less than $100,000, we give you $15,000 to build and $5,000 to buy. That's to encourage that, people to build homes and buy homes. We had allocated money in July last year. Within 4 months, the money finished. So many people had applied and had their loans approved. We have another 150 people actually with pending applications. So those are the areas that we are building upon, so people can get their own homes. You have the land being made available, the landowners are benefiting from it, and there's economic activity. So overall, from government's perspective, we need to ensure there's economic robustness. When you have economic activity, people's living conditions, their lifestyles improve. And that's what any government should do. Together with, of course, all the infrastructure development that we are doing. Okay, any other comments or questions? If there is none, thank you very much for coming. Because of the economic conditions, we don't have anything for you to eat. We hope you have had dinner before you came, or go home and have your dinner. But look, thank you very much for your participation. If you have any issues you wish to raise, please, this is the email address, budgetconsultation@economy.gov.fj. We are going through, just for information, we are going to other places in Fiji, between Bai and Lautoka on Saturday, 4 places in Nadroga on Sunday, Wednesday we're in Savusavu and Lambasa. Then of course we have to spend some time in the office and get the budget done. And the budget will be delivered on the 24th of March at 7:30 p.m. as I mentioned, and then the budget get debated the next day and God willing get approved the next day. So thank you very much for your contributions and I wish you a good evening. Minaka, thank you.